Do you know what's a really bad movie? The latest Ant-Man film. What basically happens is Ant-Man and his family are stuck in the quantum realm, which is essentially a void outside of time and space. It's sometimes possible for clubs to be stuck in that void, although hopefully with less crappy CGI and it's actually entertaining. So who is it who's actually stuck in the void?
Turn it off. Now!
When you think of Stoke, you probably think of Tony Pulis, Rory Delap's long throws, Ryan Shawcross. But it's quite easy to forget, Stoke finished in the top half of the Premier League for 3 seasons in a row. Played some decent football with some really exciting players. But then, everything fell apart. They got relegated and have since been stuck in the aforementioned void. There are 2 seasons separating Stoke from regular top half finishers to where they are now, where they've had 6 seasons in a row finishing between 14th and 17th. How has this happened and will it change anytime soon? Let's find out. I'm Ryan Dilks from the second tier and this is Stoke City, the club stuck in the void. So let's start at the beginning. Stoke were relegated in 2018 after a 10-year stint in the Premier League. Several big players leaving, terrible recruitment, a shocking defensive record, not sacking Mark Hughes earlier, and appointing Paul Lambert were the main reasons why. But Stoke were very keen to get back to the big time at the first time of asking. And so the first thing they did is getting Derby manager Gary Rowett. His stock at the time was high after brilliant jobs at Burton and Birmingham, and he just got Derby into the playoffs. Several players left in the summer of 2018 at Stoke, but Rowett was well backed. They spent £39 million on new players, and it ended up being one of the worst transfer windows in Championship history. We start with Benakofobe, who cost £12 million. He technically joined on loan at first, but it was an obligation to buy, so still 12 million. It was the 5th most expensive transfer in Championship history at the time, and he would go on to play just 51 games for Stoke, scoring 9 goals before leaving for a small fee. Tom Ince joined for 10 million. He would play 103 games, scoring just 14 goals before eventually being released. Sam Clucas signed for 6 million, but failed to impress in the time he was there and was also eventually released. Peter Atibo, he cost 6 million. He had a good start to life at Stoke but was dropped from the squad for apparently not training hard enough and spent his final 2.5 years at Stoke out on loan before eventually also being released. James McLean is the last one who joined for big money. He cost 5 million and actually did okay, but didn't repay that 5 million and would also go on to be released on a free. This one transfer window completely buggered Stoke for years. To spend 39 million in a window and not go up is a big problem anyway, but that's before you even get onto the wages. Stoke spent £56 million that season on wages, the second most in the division behind only Aston Villa, and one of the most any club has ever spent on wages in a single season in the Championship. A lot of that was down to players who were on big wages in the Premier League and were still there, like Jack Butland, who was reportedly on £60,000 a week. Joe Allen was said to be on 40 grand a week, but even Benakofobe, who they signed in the Championship, was given a 48 grand a week contract. So this one transfer window, plus the failure to shift the big earners, it really left Stoke under a lot of pressure in terms of balancing the books and not breaching financial rules, but more on that shortly. The 2018-19 season would end up being a disaster for Stoke on the pitch as well, if that wasn't obvious already. After a poor start to the season, Stoke had a minor pickup but was stuck in mid-table. 26 games in, Gary Rowett was sacked, with Stoke 14th in the Championship. So where did it all go wrong? Well, why not hear from the man himself? We spoke to Gary Rowett back in January.
When you first went into the club, it just felt like it wasn't where it needed to be to get back into the Premier League. It felt it needed a lot of work. I had a lot of players come to see me very early on that had issues at the club and wanted to leave. And it's always hard to say that at the time. It's always hard to share some of those problems. There was a little bit of disparity within the squad with different groups and different players, and so there were challenges. And that pre-season was probably the hardest pre-season I've ever had. You had 10 players that weren't training with a squad because you felt they were leaving, and so therefore it was a massive challenge.
So who came in after Gary Rowett? None other than Mr. Passion himself. Stoke brought in Nathan Jones from Luton Town. He had just got Luton promoted from League 2 and had them instantly near the top of League 1. So he came in at Stoke, and it's fair to say he didn't replicate the same magic that he did at Luton. Instead, they became incredibly boring and drew a lot of games. From the point Nathan Jones took charge until the end of the season, he had 20 games. They would draw 11 of them. They did have the third best offensive record in that time, but had the second worst goal scoring record. Maybe they should have spent more on their attack. Oh yeah. And so it was around this time that Stoke truly got stuck in the void, and what we began to see was a pattern emerging. This video is brought to you by our good friends at SBK. If you haven't heard of them yet, then where have you been? SBK's comprehensive range of markets and exclusive offers makes it the best place to bet on the championship this season. Whether you're creating an accumulator or customizing your bet builder, SBK has got you covered. Don't believe us? Sign up today and find out. Stoke would appoint a promising young manager who looked a good appointment on paper. They would have all their promise ripped away after not being able to improve anything despite having a strong squad, and then get spat out the other end. Nathan Jones would win just 2 of his first 14 matches in charge of the 2019-20 season before getting sacked. He's a rare case in the way that he managed to get his career back on track after being at Stoke. The others haven't been so lucky. Michael O'Neill came in after Jones. He's the only manager to have taken Northern Ireland to a major tournament in the last 38 years. He went in at Stoke and despite some promising moments couldn't improve things. After him it was Alex Neil. Prior to Stoke he had done a great job at every club he'd been at. Norwich, Preston, Sunderland, went to Stoke and it was meh. Next up was Stephen Schumacher, one of the most promising young managers in the EFL after winning League 1 with Plymouth, but after 10 months at Stoke before getting sacked, his stock has plummeted. And this is just what Stoke have done in the last few years, seemingly suck all the excitement and ability out of a coach. They get sacked and the process repeats itself. It's bizarre because a lot of these managers have had good squads to work with, but nothing has changed. So why does it happen? Problem number 1 is recruitment. While I think Stoke's squads over the years have been good enough to do better than they have been, the recruitment has been very all over the place. They've had different people in charge of that over the past few years, but there never seems to have been a clear plan. A good example of that is the 2023-24 season. Alex Neil is in charge and a guy called Ricky Martin is in charge of recruitment. No, not that one. They made 19 signings the summer before the season started and a further 5 in the winter. So 24 signings in total that season. At the start of this season, only 3 of those players started in their first game against Coventry. Many of them have even left already. Ricky Martin ended up getting sacked last season because of that, but they've tried plenty of different people in charge of bringing in players. None of them have had much success. Another problem is the culture at the club. In March of this year, The Athletic did a piece on Stoke City where they spoke to anonymous former employees. One of them said this: "They've never got the culture right. It's a very cold culture. It's the one club I've been at where there's no collective will to want to win. I've been at other clubs where players know what the badge means and who they're playing for. It's about livelihoods and jobs. At Stoke, it's nothing like that. It's soulless. There's no oomph about it. There's never any suggestion of getting people together. Let's win the title. One club, one team. None of that." Another said this: "Different managers have brought different styles. What's the Stoke way of playing? Until someone finds the Stoke riddle and unwraps it, it will just perpetuate it all." All this feeds into the lack of a plan. I know it's something I bang on a lot on this channel, particularly in my Cardiff video from last week, but there's no evidence that someone at Stoke has said, right, we're going to get into the Premier League in 5 years and this is how we're going to do it. It feels like we've got another case here of a club who are only thinking about the short term. But you know what this bizarre thing is with Stoke? They're loaded. Stoke are owned by the Coates family. They own the bookmaker Bet365 and are lifelong supporters of Stoke. The latest Sunday Times Rich list has them down as the 16th wealthiest family in the UK, estimated to be worth around £9 billion. It's believed that they've invested around £340 million in Stoke since 2006, and that desire to back the club hasn't slowed down. So why aren't they spending millions to get them promoted? It's the 3 letters that the Coates family absolutely despise: FFP. Because of financial fair play, Stoke's hands are tied. They've made so many losses over the years that they can't afford to make much more, otherwise they could breach the rules. Stoke's owners have campaigned for a long time for a change to these rules so that they can put more money into the club. They're basically the Newcastle United of the Championship. Everyone knows they're absolutely loaded, they're just not allowed to spend it. So it means they're going to have to be clever with how they spend their money. Have they done that? No. Absolutely not. Don't get me wrong, there are some good players at Stoke. South Korean winger Bae Jun-ho and Dutch midfielder Wouter Berger are seen as Stoke's two bright hopes for the future. Both have been linked with moves to some big European clubs. Another is Dutch attacker Miljan Manhoff, who has scored some important goals for Stoke since joining in February. Junior Chamadou is a promising young right-back who's played for the Cameroonian national team. The problem is, in recent years, Stoke have made about 10 poor signings for every one good signing. So the man who's trying to change that is their new technical director, John Walters. Yes, that John Walters. He was appointed on a permanent basis in April. He said he wants to build brick by brick towards the ambition of getting Stoke back into the Premier League. How that will go, only time will tell. He made his first big call by sacking Steven Schumacher just 5 games into the season. Reports say Walters actually wanted to get rid of him at the end of last season, so he clearly didn't believe in Schumacher and wanted to get his own man in. That man is Narcis Pelach, former assistant coach at Huddersfield and Norwich, a very highly rated coach. How he gets on in his first big management job, only time will tell. But it's clear Walters rates him highly. One thing that's undoubtable is Pelach has got a big job in his hands to get Stoke out of the void. So how does that happen? Well, the first thing is they've got to change the culture of the club. When you've had several managers in charge and several good players through the door, there must be a problem behind the scenes. There has to be a shift of mindset to make the players realise that 6 seasons in a row where you fail to finish above 14th is simply not good enough for Stoke. Another thing, though, is making the fans feel connected to the club again. Stoke were famous in the Premier League for having one of the loudest home supports in the division. That's definitely not the case anymore. I've spoken to several Stoke fans over the years, and they say there doesn't feel like there's a relationship between the club and supporters anymore. That can make such a difference if it changes. The final and most important thing is getting that recruitment right. Stoke will always have money available to spend as long as they stay away from breaking FFP rules. They just need to make sure they spend it well, whether that's looking abroad to players who are good value or buying players young so that they can sell them on. It's up for them to decide. Is £1.5 million on a 29-year-old Sam Gallagher a good example of spending your money well? Maybe it's too soon to judge John Walters on this summer's business. But this is the main thing that's going to get Stoke out of the void. If they spend too much time in there, they'll continue drifting and it could end up with them getting relegated. They nearly got relegated last season. That must have been considered a warning shot from a Stoke perspective. So this has been Stoke City, the club stuck in the void. How do you think they get out of it? Let me know in the comments section below. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like and subscribe for more content like this. I've been Ryan Dilks from The Second Tier, and we'll be back again very soon.